The air in the community clubhouse conference room was thick with the scent of stale coffee and self-importance. It was a small room, made smaller by the oversized mahogany table that served as the Pinehurst Meadows Homeowners Association Board of Directors' seat of power. Garrett Hayes stood before them, a man more comfortable with framing squares and chalk lines than with the linguistic gymnastics of corporate governance. He felt profoundly out of place in his cleanest work shirt, his calloused hands resting awkwardly on the back of a flimsy guest chair. Across the polished expanse of wood sat Vivian Whitmore, the HOA president. She wore a tailored cream-colored blazer, her blonde hair sculpted into a helmet of serene authority. Her smile was a masterpiece of polite dismissal. To her left sat Tom, the treasurer, a man who seemed permanently lost in a spreadsheet. And to her right, Brenda, the secretary, whose pen scratched furiously across a legal pad, documenting every syllable of Garrett's humiliation. "Mr. Hayes," Vivian began, her voice as smooth and cool as the marble countertops in her recently renovated kitchen. "We have your written response to the violation notice regarding the commercial vehicle parked in your driveway. While the board appreciates you taking the time to explain your position, Article 7, Section 3 of our covenants, conditions, and restrictions is quite clear." She tapped a perfectly manicured finger on a leather-bound binder in front of her. And I quote, "No commercial vehicles, trailers, or recreational vehicles shall be parked overnight where visible from any common area or street." Garrett took a slow breath, trying to keep his voice even. "Vivian, Mrs. Whitmore, with all due respect, I've parked my work truck in that exact spot for 15 years, long before this HOA even existed. My property predates the covenants." "A common misconception," Vivian said, the smile never faltering. "While your lot was indeed one of the original parcels, the act of forming an HOA and recording the CC&Rs applies them to all properties within the plat map. Unless a specific, written exemption was filed with the county at the time of recordation, our attorney has confirmed no such exemption exists for your parcel. Number 101. It was a masterclass in procedural dominance. She had done her homework, weaponizing legal jargon he didn't fully understand. He felt the eyes of the other 10 homeowners in the audience on him. Most were newer residents, drawn by Vivian's promise of protecting their investment. "My truck is my livelihood," Garrett said, his voice tightening. "It's how I put food on the table. It has company logos. Yes, but it's a standard pickup. It's not a cement mixer or a semi-trailer." Vivian's expression shifted to one of practiced sympathy. "We understand that, Garrett. And the board truly empathizes. However, our duty is to uphold the governing documents for the benefit of the entire community. The aesthetic integrity of Pinehurst Meadows is paramount to maintaining our property values." She looked around the room, making eye contact with her supporters. "We are all in this together." He saw the nods. He saw the cold, appraising looks. To them, he wasn't a neighbor. He was a variable in an equation of property values. His F-350, a symbol of his life's work, was a blemish on their pristine suburban canvas. "So, what happens now?" he asked, the question feeling like a surrender. "The board has voted to uphold the violation," Vivian announced, her tone now crisp and official. Brenda's pen scratched a final, decisive line. "The initial fine of $50 is now due. You have 14 days to cure the violation, that is, to move the truck to a location not visible from the street, such as inside your garage, if the violation is not cured within that time frame. A daily fine of $25 will begin to accrue. This is all outlined in the association's enforcement policy." She slid a neatly printed invoice across the table. Brenda will see that the official notice of the board's decision is sent to you via certified mail. The finality of it was a physical blow. He had come here hoping for reason, for a neighborly conversation. Instead, he was handed a bill and an ultimatum, all wrapped in the suffocating politeness of bureaucratic procedure. He looked at the invoice, a piece of paper that felt heavier than a bag of concrete. He had been tried and sentenced by a jury of his, not his peers, not by a long shot. He picked up the invoice, the paper crisp and alien in his work-worn hands. He gave a single, curt nod, turned without another word, and walked out of the conference room. The heavy wooden door clicked shut behind him, sealing him out of their world and them into theirs. As he stepped into the evening air, the smell of manicured lawns and blooming azaleas felt mocking, a perfumed veneer over something rotten. He had lost. He had been outmaneuvered and publicly shamed. And as he walked home, under the perfectly spaced, HOA-approved streetlights, he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that this was not the end. It was just the beginning. Garrett's house was the only one on Pinehurst Drive that felt like it had grown from the soil rather than being dropped onto it. A modest ranch, built by his wife's father in the late 90s. Its brick was weathered, its oak trees mature. Inside, it was a museum of a life he was still learning to live without. Elena's vanilla-scented candles, though unlit for 3 years, had left a ghost of their fragrance in the curtains. Her gardening books were still stacked by the armchair, a bookmark holding her place in a chapter on cultivating hydrangeas. The house was his sanctuary. But tonight, it felt like a fortress under siege. He dropped his keys into the ceramic bowl she had made in a pottery class, the clatter echoing in the silence. On the kitchen counter, next to a stack of mail, sat a thick, 3-ring binder with a faded label, Pinehurst Meadows, property docs. Elena had been meticulous, a planner, the daughter of a savvy landowner. She understood the power of paper. He had glanced through it once when they first moved in, but the dense legalese had made his eyes glaze over. Now, he opened it with a grim sense of purpose. He found the CC&Rs Vivian had quoted. Article 7, Section 3. The words stared back at him, cold and inflexible. She was right. The rule was real. But its application felt deeply, personally targeted. The Millers 2 streets over had a boat on a trailer in their driveway from April to September. The Davidsons had a massive RV they parked on the street for a week before, and after every trip. Why him? Why now? He flipped through the pages, his frustration mounting. Then another clause caught his eye, one he had never noticed before. He ran his finger under the words, reading them aloud to the empty room. 8.4.2 View corridors. No structure, fence, landscaping, or vehicle may be placed or maintained in such a manner as to unreasonably obstruct the scenic view from an adjacent property or from the common area. Unreasonably obstruct the scenic view. The phrase was so vague, so subjective, it was absurd. What was the scenic view from the street? His garage door, his neatly trimmed lawn. He dismissed it as unenforceable nonsense. Another example of lawyers getting paid by the word. He would later learn that in the hands of a skilled manipulator, ambiguity was a far more potent weapon than clarity. He closed the binder, the snap of the rings sounding like a cell door locking. His gaze drifted to the old roll-top desk in the corner, the one that had belonged to Elena's father, Richard. After he passed, they had cleared out most of his things, but the desk remained, too heavy and sentimental to move. Garrett had never fully gone through its contents. On a whim, he pulled open the deep bottom drawer. It was filled with old files, tax returns from the early 2000s, and warranties for appliances long since replaced. Underneath a stack of brittle manila folders, his fingers brushed against two rolled-up documents tied with a faded red ribbon. He unrolled the first. It was a large, blue-lined paper. A surveyor's plat map of the original land parcel, dated 1997. It was a dizzying web of lines, angles, and notations S 8090-15, E 330, YG. It depicted the entire tract of land before it became Pinterest Meadows. With his lot clearly sectioned off at the corner, the lines seemed to extend oddly, encompassing the area where the road now lay. But the markings were indecipherable to his untrained eye. It looked complex and important, but he had no idea what it meant. The second document was an easement deed between Richard and Metrobrook Development Corporation, the original builder. It was dense with legal terminology about ingress, egress, and utility rights of way. He scanned it, but the language was a thicket he couldn't penetrate. Frustrated and exhausted, he rolled the documents back up, secured them with the ribbon, and placed them on the desk. They were a puzzle from the past he didn't have the energy to solve. The neighborhood had changed so much when he and Elena moved in. It was a community of tradesmen, nurses, and teachers, people who worked with their hands and helped their neighbors. Harold Jensen, 3 doors down, a retired city planner, had helped him frame his back deck. The Chens had shared their garden's bounty every summer. Then the boom came. Property values skyrocketed. The original owners began to cash out, replaced by families from out of state who saw their homes not as places to live, but as assets to be managed. Vivian Whitmore was the avatar of this new Pinterest Meadows. She had moved from California in 2020 and within 6 months had orchestrated the formalization of the dormant HOA, getting herself elected president on a platform of protecting our investment. Her own investment was a sprawling, sterile McMansion that loomed over the street, its perfectly manicured lawn a testament to a life devoid of spontaneity. Garrett had learned of Vivian's past from Harold, years ago, before Pinterest Meadows was even a concept. Vivian's mentor, a big-shot commercial developer, had tried to buy the land from Elena's father. Richard, however, had seen the man for the shark he was and refused to sell, eventually partnering with the more community-minded Metrobrook Development instead. The deal had publicly embarrassed Vivian's mentor and, by extension, his ambitious protégé. Was this it? A 20-year-old grudge, a vendetta against a dead man, played out against his son-in-law? The thought was so petty, so pathologically vindictive. It seemed impossible. But as Garrett stood in the quiet of his home, the memory of Vivian's cold, triumphant eyes at the hearing settled in his gut. It wasn't just possible. It was the only thing that made sense. This wasn't about a truck. It was about power and settling a very old score. For 2 weeks, Garrett played by their rules. Each evening after his 14-hour shift, he performed the weary ritual of backing his F-350 into his 2-car garage. It was a tight fit. The garage, already home to Elena's old sedan and a lifetime's worth of tools, became a nightly game of inches. The scent of sawdust and diesel exhaust now permeated the space, a constant, cloying reminder of his capitulation. He felt a sharp pang of resentment every time he squeezed past the truck's fender to get to his workbench. This was his home, his castle, and he was being forced to hide a part of his identity within its walls. He paid the $50 fine. He mailed a check to the management company's sterile P.O. box. The act of writing Vivian's HOA on the payee line, feeling like a tribute paid to a conquering warlord. He hoped that would be the end of it. He had complied. He had bent the knee. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. It wasn't left in his mailbox or on his doorstep. It came via certified mail, requiring his signature. a tactic designed for maximum intimidation. The green and white slip from the postal carrier felt like a summons. He signed for it, his hand unsteady, and slid open the thick, cream-colored envelope bearing the HOA's embossed logo. His eyes scanned the document, his heart sinking with every line. It was a second formal violation notice. Re-CC&R Article 7, Section 3, Commercial Vehicle, and Article Weight. Section 8.4.2, View Corridor Obstruction. The letter stated that while he had moved the truck into the garage, his work trailer, a small, single-axle utility trailer he used perhaps twice a month, was now parked in the side yard, behind a 6-foot privacy fence. He had parked it there specifically so it would be hidden, while the trailer is partially obscured by fencing. The letter read, "The top 2 feet of the trailer's frame are visible from the street over the fence line. This constitutes an ongoing violation of VAWR 7.3. Furthermore, the placement of said trailer constitutes an unreasonable obstruction of the scenic view corridor from the common area, as per VAWR 8.4.2. There it was, the absurd, catch-all clause about scenic view corridors. Weaponized. The scenic view of what the side of his neighbor's house. The letter went on to inform him that since this was a second violation within a 6-month period, the fine was automatically doubled to $100. Worse, because the original violation was not considered fully cured. Daily penalties of $25 were being retroactively applied from the date of the board hearing. The total amount due was now $475. Garrett's breath caught in his chest. It was a shakedown, a blatant, predatory money grab disguised in the language of community standards. He gripped the letter until the edges creased, the paper a flimsy defense against the weight of the injustice. This was no longer a simple dispute over a parking spot. This was a campaign. Vivian was not just enforcing a rule. She was hunting for infractions, meticulously building a case, one piece of certified paper at a time. The trailer had been in that exact spot for 5 years. She had waited until he cured the first violation, then immediately cited him for the second, linking them together to trigger the harsher penalties. He walked outside, the letter clutched in his hand, and stared at the trailer. From the street, if you stood at just the right angle and were 6.5 feet tall, you could, indeed, see the black metal rail of the trailer peeking over the top of his fence. It was a sliver of black against the sky, an unreasonable obstruction. The sheer, calculated malice of it stole his breath. Vivian wasn't just a petty tyrant. She was a strategist. She was using the HOA's governing documents not as a guide for community living, but as an arsenal. The certified mail, the retroactive fines, the citation of a second. Obscure rule, it was a declaration of war. She was trying to bury him in fines, to bleed him dry with paperwork and procedure until he either broke or fled. He stood there on his lawn, the setting sun casting long shadows across the perfectly manicured neighborhood. He could sell. He could take the equity from his home and leave, find a place in the country with no neighbors and no rules. But then he thought of Elena, of the life they had built in this house, of the promises he had made to her in her final days, to never let anyone push him around. A cold, hard resolve settled over him. He would not run. He would not be bled dry. He looked down at the official notice in his hand, at the clinical, heartless words. She had built her fortress out of paper. He decided then and there that he would tear it down with the same. He was a builder, after all, and he was about to start the demolition. Garrett's first call was to Jake Riley, a friend since high school who had traded a tool belt for a law degree. Jake specialized in construction law, but his mind was a steel trap for contracts and loopholes. They met at a small diner downtown. the air thick with the smell of coffee and frying bacon. Garrett laid the violation notices, the hearing decision, and the latest certified letter on the table between their mugs. Jake read through them slowly, his expression shifting from amusement to a focused intensity. "This is impressive," Jake said, tapping the second violation. "She's good. She's using the procedural framework exactly as intended, but with malicious intent. On the surface, she's following the letter of the law, proving in court that her application of a subjective rule like scenic view is unreasonable is possible, but it's expensive and time-consuming. She knows that." "So I'm stuck?" Garrett asked, the hope that had propelled him here beginning to drain away. "Not stuck, but you can't fight her on her chosen battlefield," Jake explained. "Arguing the merits of the violation is what she wants. It keeps you on the defensive. We need to change the game. HOAs are corporations, and they have legal obligations. Transparency is one of them." Jake scribbled on a napkin. "Under state law, as a homeowner, you have the right to inspect the association's official records. We're going to make a formal request, in writing, for everything. Meeting minutes for the last 5 years. All financial statements, vendor contracts, and correspondence with the HOA's attorney." "What are we looking for?" "A pattern," Jake said, taking a sip of his coffee. "Is she applying these rules to everyone, or just you? Are there minutes from a meeting where they discussed you specifically? Is the HOA paying an attorney exorbitant fees to pursue this? We're looking for any evidence that the board is acting in bad faith, not for the benefit of the community, but to pursue a personal vendetta. That's a breach of their fiduciary duty." The strategy felt solid, a shift from defending his trailer to scrutinizing their governance. Following Jake's instructions, Garrett drafted a formal, polite letter requesting access to the documents, citing the relevant state statutes. He sent it via certified mail to the HOA's management company, a third-party firm named Pristine Community Management. A week later, he received a response. It was a single page, written in cool, professional language. His request, they stated, was overly broad and burdensome. However, in the spirit of transparency, they had enclosed copies of the past 12 months of approved board meeting minutes. He could schedule an appointment to review financial summaries at their office during normal business hours. Garrett spread the minutes out on his kitchen table. At first glance, they seemed innocuous records of motions to approve landscaping contracts and discussions about holiday decorations. But then he saw it. Entire sections, sometimes half a page long, were blacked out with a thick, dark marker. At the bottom of each redacted page was a small, italicized note, redacted pursuant to attorney-client privilege. The black bars were a wall, a deliberate obstruction. They were hiding something, and they were using the law to do it. He called Jake, his voice tight with frustration. "They've blacked out huge chunks of the minutes. They're claiming attorney-client privilege." Jake swore softly on the other end of the line. "That's a classic stonewalling tactic. They can claim that any discussion held with their lawyer present is privileged. It's often legitimate, but it's also a convenient way to hide discussions about targeting a specific homeowner. They're daring you to sue them for access, which they know you can't afford." The first obstacle had proven to be a fortress. The HOA, with its management company and its lawyers, had created a perfectly legal, perfectly maddening bureaucratic shield. They were operating within their rights, just as Vivian had been. Garrett was fighting a system designed to protect itself, a system that Vivian knew how to manipulate from the inside. He felt a familiar wave of defeat. He was a contractor, a builder. He knew how to deal with tangible problems with wood, and concrete, and steel. This world of paper shields and privileged information felt like trying to punch smoke. "Don't give up," Jake said, sensing his friend's despair. They control the present, but they don't control the past. The HOA's records are one thing, but county records are another. They're public. Every deed, every plat map, every easement filed since the county was founded is sitting in a records office downtown. If there's a secret to your property, it's not in their redacted minutes. It's in the public record. The suggestion was a lifeline. It was a new direction, a path around the wall they had built. The fight wasn't over. He just had to find a different set of blueprints. Vivian's counterattack was swift and insidious. Having successfully blocked his access to the HOA's inner workings, she escalated the conflict from procedural harassment to a full-blown smear campaign. The battleground shifted to the Pinehurst Meadows Community Facebook group, a digital town square she controlled with an iron fist. The first post was a masterpiece of passive aggression, a friendly reminder to all residents. Vivian wrote that maintaining our community's aesthetic standards is a team effort. Unsightly items, even when partially hidden, can impact the peaceful enjoyment of our neighbors' properties and affect our collective home values. Let's all do our part. Pinterest Pride. The post was accompanied by a photograph, taken from an artful, anonymizing angle, showing the top of Garrett's trailer peeking over his fence. The comment section quickly filled with her acolytes. So trashy, one wrote. Some people just have no respect. Added another. Garrett watched as his reputation was dismantled online, one comment at a time. He was being painted as the problem neighbor, the selfish holdout who refused to be a team player. Any attempt he made to defend himself was met with a chorus of derision, or, more often, Vivian would simply delete his comment, citing rules against personal attacks. The digital assault was soon followed by a more tangible one. Anonymous calls to city code enforcement became a weekly occurrence. One week, it was a complaint about his grass being a quarter-inch too high. The next, it was about a potential fire hazard from the stack of firewood by his back door. Each time, a city official would arrive, apologize for the inconvenience, find no violation, and leave, shaking their head. It was a war of attrition, designed to wear him down, to keep him perpetually off balance. Through it all, Harold Jensen was his rock. The retired city planner would often appear at his door with 2 cups of coffee just when the frustration felt overwhelming. "She's trying to isolate you," Harold said one morning, watching as another code enforcement truck pulled away. "Make you feel like the whole world is against you. It's a bully's oldest trick." Harold's sharp, analytical mind, honed by decades of navigating municipal bureaucracy, saw patterns where Garrett only saw harassment. These complaints, the language she uses in the Facebook posts, it's all very precise. She's not just angry. Garrett, she's building a record. She's creating a paper trail to justify whatever she's planning next. Spurred by Jake's advice and Harold's encouragement, Garrett decided to start his own investigation. He took a day off work, a day of lost income he couldn't really afford, and drove to the county recorder's office. The building was a sterile, beige monument to bureaucracy, filled with the quiet hum of computers and the scent of aging paper. He felt like a fish out of water. But the clerk was surprisingly helpful, showing him how to use the digital archives to search for records related to his parcel number. He started digging, pulling up every document associated with his lot and the surrounding Pinehurst Meadows development. For hours, he scrolled through grainy scans of deeds, mortgages, and liens, the history of his neighborhood unfolding on the screen. He saw the initial sale from Elena's father, Richard, to Metrobrook Development. He saw the individual deeds for every house on his street. He saw the bankruptcy filing for Metrobrook in 2001. It was tedious, frustrating work. Most of what he found was exactly what he expected. But Harold had said something that stuck with him. Look for the things that aren't there. Sometimes the most important part of the record is the missing piece. Late in the afternoon, fueled by lukewarm vending machine coffee, he stumbled upon the original subdivision plan filed by Metrobrook. It was a multi-page document detailing the creation of the 127 lots that would become Pinterest Meadows. Tucked into the appendices was a list of actions the developer was required to complete before the project was considered finalized. One item stood out: dedication of all roadways, including Pinterest Drive, to the city for public use and maintenance, to be completed upon the sale of 75% of developed lots. His heart began to pound. He searched frantically for a corresponding document, a deed of dedication transferring ownership of the road to the city. He searched the Metrobrook records. He searched the city's records. He searched for anything showing that the transfer had actually happened. There was nothing. The bankruptcy file for Metrobrook Development from 2001 provided the answer. The company had gone under after selling only 88 of the 127 lots, just under 70%. They had never reached the 75% threshold that would have triggered the mandatory dedication of the road. A dizzying thought began to form in his mind. So audacious, so impossible. He almost dismissed it. If the developer never formally handed the road over to the city, who still owned it? He pulled up the original 1997 deed of sale again, the one from Richard to Metrobrook. He read the legal description of the land that was sold, his finger tracing the complex language. Then he compared it to the description of his own lot, the one Richard had carved out and kept for himself. The answer was there, hidden in plain sight in the surveyor's jargon. The land sold to Metrobrook was for the 127 residential lots only. The sale had explicitly excluded the parcels designated for the roadways. Garrett leaned back in the hard plastic chair, the hum of the archives fading into a dull roar in his ears. The road, the very asphalt that Vivian's Tesla glided over every day, had never been sold to the developer. It had never been dedicated to the city. It had remained the private property of its original owner, Elena's father. And now, through inheritance, it was his. He didn't just own his house. He owned the entire street. The realization was a seismic shock. Garrett sat in the sterile quiet of the county recorder's office, staring at the screen as if the pixels themselves might rearrange and tell him he was wrong. He printed every relevant document: the original sales deed, the subdivision plan, the Metrobrook bankruptcy filing, and the glaringly absent deed of dedication. The stack of papers in his hands felt impossibly heavy, a tangible weight of history and leverage. He drove straight from the archives to Harold's house. The retired planner was in his garden, tending to his tomato plants. Garrett spread the documents out on the patio table, the afternoon sun casting sharp shadows on the legal text. Harold put on his reading glasses, his brow furrowed in concentration. He read through the papers slowly, methodically, his finger tracing the property lines on a copy of the old plat map Garrett had found in the desk, the very map Garrett had dismissed weeks ago. For the first time, with Harold's guidance, the arcane surveyor's marks began to make sense. "Well, I'll be," Harold said, a slow grin spreading across his face. He took off his glasses and looked at Garrett, his eyes twinkling with a mixture of shock and delight. That wily old fox. Richard didn't just sell them the lots. He leased them the access. He structured the deal so he retained ownership of the road, likely planning to dedicate it to the city himself once the development was stable. But then, Metrobrook went bust before the trigger point. And the paperwork fell through the cracks. Garrett finished, the pieces clicking into place. It never got transferred. "It's not just a crack. Son, it's a canyon," Harold said. tapping the plat map. According to these official, recorded documents, you are the fee simple owner of the land on which Pinterest Drive is built. The other homeowners, at best, they have a prescriptive easement, a right to use the road because they've been doing so for years. But ownership, that's all you. The power of this revelation was staggering. Garrett felt a dizzying sense of vertigo. He had been fighting a defensive war, desperately trying to protect his small corner of the world. Now, he realized he owned the entire board, this entire conflict. Vivian's meticulous campaign of fines and violations for a vehicle visible from the common area was predicated on a false assumption. The street wasn't a common area controlled by the HOA. It was his private property. He went home and immediately called Linda. A sharp, no-nonsense title officer Jake had recommended. He scanned and emailed her the documents. Her call came less than an hour later. "Mr. Hayes," she said, her voice crisp and professional. "I've cross-referenced these with our title plant records, barring some unrecorded document no one knows about. Your interpretation is correct. The chain of title for the roadway parcel terminates with your late wife's inheritance of her father's estate. You own the road, free and clear." The confirmation sent a jolt of electricity through him. The fight had changed. He was no longer on the defensive, reacting to Vivian's attacks. He was now on offense. That night, he sat at Elena's father's desk and carefully unrolled the original plat map and the easement deed he had found weeks earlier. The documents he had once found so intimidating now looked like a treasure map, with the knowledge he now possessed. The complex lines and legal phrases became crystal clear. He saw the precise boundaries of his ownership. He saw the carefully worded clauses Richard had inserted, protecting his rights. He thought of Vivian, 3 doors down in her million-dollar house, so proud of her power, so certain of her authority, her entire world, her home's value, her ability to even get to her own front door, rested on an assumption of public access that was a legal fiction. She had spent months trying to bully him off a few square feet of his driveway, never realizing he held title to the very ground her house depended on. A hard, cold anger, the kind he hadn't felt since the night of the hearing, solidified within him. But this time, it wasn't the helpless rage of a victim. It was the focused, calculated fury of a man who had just been handed a weapon of unimaginable power. He picked up his phone and called Jake. "Jake," he said, his voice steady and calm. "We need to talk. The game has changed. I don't think Vivian is going to like the new rules." News of Garrett's inquiries at the county recorder's office traveled faster than he could have imagined. Someone in the bureaucracy, perhaps a clerk, friendly with a local real estate agent, must have tipped Vivian off. Her reaction was not of a reasonable person seeking to understand a situation, but of a cornered animal. She panicked. 2 days after his discovery, a courier delivered a thick envelope to Garrett's door. It was from the high-priced law firm the HOA kept on retainer. Inside was a formal cease and desist letter, its language dripping with legal aggression. It accused him of a pattern of harassment and intimidation against the board president, citing his unwarranted investigation into private association matters and his attempts to interfere with the quiet enjoyment of the community. The letter demanded he immediately halt all inquiries and public records requests, and ominously warned that any attempt to cloud the title of properties within Pinterest Meadows would be met with swift and severe legal action, including a lawsuit for slander of title. It was a transparent, desperate bluff. He was researching his own property rights, all within the bounds of the law, and she was trying to frame it as harassment. Jake laughed out loud when Garrett read the letter to him over the phone. "She's terrified," Jake said. "She knows you found something, and she's trying to scare you into silence before you figure out how to use it. Ignore it. It's legal noise." But Vivian wasn't just making noise. She was mobilizing. The next day, official notices were posted on the community mailboxes and sent out via email blast. Notice of special meeting of the homeowners. A special meeting of the Pinehurst Meadows Homeowners Association will be held on Thursday, November 5th, at 7:00 p.m. in the community clubhouse. Agenda: to discuss and vote upon a proposed special assessment to fund necessary legal action to protect the association and its members from ongoing external threats and to preserve the integrity of our community's property rights. The language was vague, but the message was clear. She was calling a public meeting to raise a war chest from the other homeowners to sue him. She was painting him as an external threat, a boogeyman from whom the community needed financial protection. She was going to use their money to fight a battle she had started and was now on the verge of losing spectacularly. Harold called him the moment he saw the notice. "This is a classic move. Garrett, she's circling the wagons. She's going to go in there. Tell a scary story about a rogue homeowner trying to destroy everyone's property values and scare them into giving her a blank check." The second obstacle was no longer a piece of paper, but a public forum. She was taking the fight to a place where she felt strongest, in front of an audience she could manipulate, using fear and misinformation as her primary tools. Garrett knew he couldn't let her control the narrative. "I have to go," Garrett told Jake. "I have to speak." "You'll get your chance," Jake said. "According to the HOA's own bylaws, there's an open forum for homeowners at every meeting. They have to give you time, but they can limit it. Expect it to be 5 minutes, maybe less. She'll have the timer on the podium." The challenge was laid bare. He had 5 minutes. 5 minutes to undo months of Vivian's lies. 5 minutes to present a complex legal argument to a room full of anxious homeowners who had been primed to see him as the enemy. He had the truth on his side. But the truth was complicated. It was buried in deeds and plat maps and the fine print of bankruptcy law. Vivian's story was simple bad man trying to hurt us. For the next week, Garrett and Jake prepared. They assembled a presentation, not with PowerPoint and pie charts like Vivian, but with cold, hard evidence. They made poster-sized enlargements of the key documents, the CC&R clauses she had used against him, a copy of the redacted meeting minutes, and the star of the show, the 1997 county-recorded plat map with his property lines, including the entirety of Pinehurst Drive, highlighted in brilliant, undeniable yellow. Jake coached him on his delivery. "Don't argue. Don't get emotional. Just present the facts. 1, 2, 3. Build the case like you're building a house. From the foundation up. Let the documents do the talking. She's counting on you being angry. Be calm. Be precise. Be the most reasonable person in that room." The night before the meeting, as Garrett practiced his 5-minute speech in his quiet living room, he felt a profound sense of Elena's presence. Her legacy wasn't just the house or the property. It was a sense of quiet strength, of fighting smart, not loud. Vivian was setting a trap, hoping he would walk into the public meeting and explode with rage, proving her point that he was an unstable menace. He wouldn't give her the satisfaction. He would walk into her arena, play by her rules, and use the truth as a sledgehammer. The clubhouse was packed, a standing-room-only theater for the evening's drama. The air buzzed with nervous energy and whispered speculation. Garrett saw the faces of his neighbors. Some were hostile, their expressions hard and closed off, already convinced by Vivian's narrative. Others looked anxious, caught in the middle. A few, like Harold and the Chens, gave him quiet, encouraging nods. Garrett signed his name on the homeowner comment sheet, as Jake had predicted. A note at the top read, Speakers will be limited to 5 minutes. Vivian sat at the head of the board table, flanked by her allies and the HOA's attorney. She called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of a gavel. On the podium next to her was a small, digital kitchen timer, its red numerals glowing ominously, Wo 5 Yo Zhou. She opened with a somber, polished speech about the sanctity of community and the unfortunate necessity of the special assessment. She spoke of a disgruntled resident engaged in a campaign to undermine the legal framework of our neighborhood, vaguely alluding to his inquiries without getting into specifics. She was painting a picture of chaos, with herself as the stoic defender of order. This special assessment of $200 per household is not a measure we take lightly, she concluded, her voice laden with faux gravity. It is an insurance policy to protect your single greatest investment, your home. Then came the homeowner forum. First on our list, Vivian said, her eyes finding Garrett in the crowd. Is Garrett Hayes? Mr. Hayes, you have 5 minutes. Garrett walked to the podium, his heart hammering against his ribs. He placed his stack of poster boards on the easel beside him. Vivian clicked the button on the timer. The countdown began. Good evening, Garrett began, his voice clear and steady, betraying none of the turmoil inside him. My name is Garrett Hayes, and I live at 121 Pinehurst Drive. For the last few months, many of you have only known me as the man with the truck. I'm here tonight to give you the full story. He turned the first poster board around. It showed the 2 violation notices he had received. This started because our board president, Mrs. Whitmore, took issue with my work truck. She cited Section 7.3 of the CC&Rs. He pointed to the highlighted text. Then, after I complied, she cited me again for my utility trailer, using a vague clause about scenic view corridors from Section 8.4.2 to escalate the fines. I wondered if this was happening to anyone else, so I made a formal request to see the association's records, as is my right under state law. He flipped to the next poster board, showing the heavily redacted meeting minutes. This is what I received. Entire sections blacked out under the guise of attorney-client privilege. What is the board hiding in these minutes? What discussions are they so desperate to keep from us, the members they represent? A murmur went through the crowd. He could feel the mood shifting, the first seeds of doubt being planted. I believe, Garrett continued, his voice gaining strength, they were hiding discussions about the very ground we're all standing on. They were hiding the fact that years ago, the board investigated the ownership status of our streets and discovered a legal complication, one they chose not to share with the homeowners. They were hiding it because Mrs. Whitmore knew something that the rest of us did not. He paused, letting the weight of the accusation settle. He turned to the final, largest poster board. It was the 1997 county recorded plat map, the yellow highlighter blazing under the fluorescent lights. This is the official plat map for the Pinehurst Meadows subdivision. On file with the county recorder, it is the foundational legal document for every home in this room, and it shows, without question, that when the developer went bankrupt, the ownership of the roads was never transferred to the city. The ownership remained with the original landowner's estate. He tapped the highlighted area that encompassed the entire street. That landowner was my wife's father, and through legal inheritance. That property now belongs to me. The street that you drive on, the land that provides access to your homes, is my private property. The room erupted. A wave of shocked, angry, and confused voices crashed against the walls. Vivian was on her feet, her face ashen. This is outrageous. He's lying. This is a desperate tactic. Mayor Rodriguez would have called for order, but Vivian was no mayor. Her gavel rapped uselessly against the table. The HOA's attorney was whispering frantically in her ear, but she couldn't hear him over the roar in her head and the noise in the room. Garrett raised his voice to be heard over the din. "This isn't a threat. This is a legal fact, and it means the HOA has no authority to fine me for a vehicle visible from a common area, that is. In fact, my own property. This entire campaign against me has been based on a fraudulent premise." He looked directly at Vivian. "A premise you knew about, because you researched it years ago and hid the truth when it didn't suit your agenda." The timer on the podium beeped insistently. His 5 minutes were up. But before he could step away, a small, quavering voice came from the back. It was Harold's wife, Mary. "He's not the only one," she said, holding up a violation notice of her own. "Vivian sent us a fine last week for Harold's vegetable garden, said it violated architectural standards." This secondary revelation that the beloved retired planner was also being targeted for something as wholesome as a garden was the final blow to Vivian's credibility. The room turned on her. The questions were no longer about Garrett, but about her abuse of power, about the special assessment. It was Jake who delivered the final, quiet checkmate. He stood up from his seat in the front row, a moral compass pointing true north. He addressed Garrett, but his voice carried through the now silent room. "Garrett," he said calmly, "you can win, but how you win matters. You can become a tyrant just like her, or you can be a leader. The choice will affect this whole community." Garrett looked out at the faces of his neighbors, their anger now mixed with fear. They were afraid of him, of the power he now held. He took a deep breath and stepped back to the podium. "I have no intention of blocking access to anyone's home," he said, his voice ringing with sincerity. "I will grant a formal road access easement to this community, free of charge." A wave of relief washed over the room, on 2 conditions. First, the board immediately rescinds all pending fines related to landscape and vehicle violations for all homeowners, including Mr. Harold Jensen. Second, this vote for a special assessment is canceled, and instead, the board agrees to a community-led review of our governing documents to ensure this can never happen again. He had taken their fear and transformed it into a constructive solution. He had proven he was a community builder, not a destroyer. The victory was no longer just his. It belonged to all of them. The immediate aftermath of Garrett's revelation was controlled chaos. The homeowners, now united against a common enemy, erupted. Cries of vote of no confidence and resign were directed at a stunned Vivian. Tom, the treasurer, looked physically ill, while Brenda, the secretary, had stopped taking notes altogether, her pen hovering uselessly over the page. The representative from Pristine Community Management, a man named Dave, quickly stepped to the podium, his face a mask of damage control. "Given the new information presented tonight," he said into the microphone, his voice straining to project calm, "I will be advising the board to table the vote on the special assessment indefinitely. Furthermore, we recommend the board immediately suspend all enforcement actions pending a full legal review of the association's authority regarding the community's roadways." He was cutting Vivian loose, severing the management company from the sinking ship of her presidency. Vivian's allies on the board, who had moments before been her staunchest supporters, now physically distanced themselves from her at the table, refusing to make eye contact. Her power had evaporated in less than 10 minutes. As the meeting devolved into shouting and procedural motions from the floor to censure the president, Jake walked calmly to the board table. He placed a neatly folded document directly in front of Vivian. "Vivian Whitmore," he said, his voice quiet but carrying in the sudden lull. "You've been served." It was a lawsuit. A personal lawsuit. Not against the HOA, but against her. Tortious interference with business, harassment, slander, the security footage of the vandalism, the false BBB complaints, the defamatory flyers, it was all there. Her attempt to ruin his livelihood was now her personal legal nightmare. She stared at the papers, as if they were a snake, her face crumbling as the full scope of her ruin became clear. She had lost her power, her reputation, and was now facing financial devastation. Garrett didn't stay to watch the rest. He had done what he came to do. He slipped out the side door, Harold at his side. The cool night air felt clean and fresh after the suffocating atmosphere of the clubhouse. "You did good, son," Harold said, clapping him on the shoulder. Richard would have been proud. Elena, too. In the days that followed, the Pinehurst Meadows HOA imploded. Vivian resigned via a terse email the next morning. 2 other board members followed suit, leaving the association without a quorum and effectively rudderless. The management company scheduled an emergency election. The news of the Pinehurst Drive situation became a local legend. A TV news crew interviewed Garrett, who politely explained the situation, framing it as a lesson in homeowner rights. His phone rang off the hook with calls from other residents in Pinehurst Meadows, apologizing for believing Vivian's lies and thanking him for standing up for them. The Millers, who had a boat, and the Davidsons, with their RV, both reached out to express their gratitude and relief. The community, once fractured by suspicion, began to mend. Vivian's beautiful McMansion went on the market 2 weeks later. The for sale sign on her perfect lawn was a quiet monument to her defeat. The lawsuit was settled out of court. Her attorney, recognizing the mountain of evidence against her, advised her to accept Garrett's terms quickly and quietly. The settlement was substantial, more than enough to cover Garrett's lost wages, his legal fees, and then some. Vivian Whitmore, the self-proclaimed house queen, left Pinehurst Meadows not with a bang, but with the quiet hum of a moving van in the dead of night. With Vivian gone, and a new, more reasonable board elected with Harold Jensen serving as a reluctant but respected advisor, a sense of collaborative spirit returned to Pinehurst Meadows. Garrett, working with the city and the new board, kept his promise. He granted a permanent, formal road access easement to the community, legally ensuring no one would ever have to worry about accessing their homes. But he did it smartly, as Elena's father would have. The easement came with protective covenants, written by Jake, that specifically prohibited any future HOA board from using street visibility as a basis for violations, effectively neutering the rule Vivian had used as her primary weapon. He took the settlement money from Vivian's lawsuit and, instead of pocketing it, established the Pinehurst Meadows Community Improvement Fund. The first project, decided by a vote of the homeowners, was to build a new playground in the underused common park, a project that brought neighbors together on weekends, raising walls and installing swing sets. Their shared work, a symbol of their rebuilt community. Garrett, a contractor once vilified for his work truck, was now leading the construction, his skills a source of pride for the neighborhood. The house at 121 Pinehurst Drive was no longer a fortress, but a home again. The quiet was no longer lonely, but peaceful. Garrett found he could finally move some of Elena's things from the armchair, making space for himself without feeling like he was erasing her memory. He was re-engaging with his life, his work, and his neighbors. His fight for Elena's legacy, having transformed into a new legacy of his own. The final surprise, the one that brought the story full circle, came a few months later. A new family, the Garcias, had moved into a house on the other side of the neighborhood. They were young, with 2 small children, and their budget was tight. The old board, in its final days under Vivian's influence, had sent them a violation notice for a small, portable basketball hoop that their son kept at the edge of their driveway. The new board, still finding its footing, was unsure how to proceed with the outstanding violation. Mrs. Garcia, nervous and unsure, approached Garrett at the next community barbecue. She had heard the stories. "Mr. Hayes," she began hesitantly, "I don't know what to do. They're saying we have to get rid of it, but it's the only thing our son has to play with." Garrett smiled. He walked her over to Harold, who was now the community's unofficial expert on property rights. Harold pulled up the county records for the Garcias' lot on his tablet. Together, the three of them looked at the old deeds. And there, it was a specific recreational use easement, granted to the original homeowner in 1999 to allow for exactly this type of equipment. An easement that had been forgotten for 20 years. Vivian, in her zealous hunt for violations, had never bothered to check the foundational documents. Armed with Garrett's research and Harold's guidance, the Garcias presented the easement to the board. The violation was immediately dismissed. The sight of the young family, empowered by knowledge, successfully defending their right to have a simple basketball hoop for their son, was a more satisfying victory than Vivian's defeat. The blueprint for justice was now a part of the community's DNA. The cycle of bullying was broken, replaced by a cycle of empowerment. Garrett watched the Garcia boy sink a perfect shot from his spot on the driveway, the ball bouncing on asphalt that Garrett owned. But that now truly belonged to everyone.